and women of Australia.
A towering figure in Australian politics gone. Edward Gough Whitlam has died in a Sydney hospice. The man who led Labor out of the wilderness to redefine Australia lauded across the political spectrum.
There's Australia pre-1972 and Australia post-1972. And that exclamation mark in our national history is his mark.
He was a big man with a big vision for a big country.
In other stories, an out-of-control truck careers into 9 cars. And another threat from an Australian Islamic State jihadi singles out Tony Abbott. Good evening, Juanita Phillips with ABC News. A bare 3 years in the nation's highest office, he leaves a legacy as large as any Australian politician. Former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam is dead at 98. Chris Uhlmann joins us tonight from Old Parliament House in Canberra.
It was on these steps nearly 40 years ago that a shattering moment was etched into Australia's political history. A Governor-General's proclamation ended Gough Whitlam's tenure as our 21st Prime Minister. Behind me in the Old King's Hall, Labor MPs have gathered for a wake to celebrate the life of one of their greatest sons. Gough Whitlam is a Labor icon and an Australian giant. Tonight we remember his lifetime of service. Here's political correspondent Mark Simpkin.
Edward Gough Whitlam was a towering figure, a man not easily dismissed.
Well may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
Nearly 4 decades later, the steps where Gough Whitlam stood that day have become a shrine to his memory. Members of the public lined up to leave tributes. A loving and generous father, he was a source of inspiration to us and our families and for millions of Australians, his children said in a statement. Politicians from all sides echoed those sentiments in an almost unprecedented display of bipartisan bereavement.
Madam Speaker, in every sense, Gough Whitlam was a giant figure in this Parliament and in our public life.
In many ways, Australia came of age under its 21st Prime Minister. Universal healthcare, free uni degrees, land rights and no-fault divorce. No Prime Ministers ushered in so much change.
He was only Prime Minister for 3 years, 3 tumultuous years, but those years changed our nation and one way or another set the tone for so much that has followed.
The flags were lowered, parliamentary business suspended. Labor's caucus mourned a death in the family. Gough Whitlam's revered in this room, the man who led his party into power after more than 2 decades of opposition.
A giant of our movement, a great leader of our nation, Edward Gough Whitlam has left us. There will be more tears shed today, I believe, for Gough Whitlam than perhaps any other leader in Australian history.
This is the most difficult speech I have made and will ever make in this caucus. He was a great parliamentarian. He was a great leader. He was a great Australian. And for so many of us, and it's what makes it so hard, he was a great friend and mentor.
It's been a very long time since Parliament's seen anything like today. Bill Shorten's leading his party from the new House to the old one as a mark of respect. It's personal. Gough Whitlam's government and dismissal inspired many of them to join the Labor cause, just as those turbulent times prompted many Conservatives to join the coalition. The Whitlam government was tumultuous, visionary, transformative and controversial, much like the man himself.
Gough, my friend and comrade, rest in peace.
Prime Ministers spanning 5 decades have paid tribute to a leader who left a mark like no other. From his prodigious wit to the breathtaking pace and scale of the change he brought, few have been left untouched by Gough Whitlam's 3 turbulent leaders as the nation's leader. Political correspondent Greg Jennett.
time came in 1972, and not a moment was wasted. 23 years in opposition had greatly dimmed Labor's light on the hill.
But it is essential now for us, this week, to set it aflame again.
He set it ablaze, governing with only his deputy in a whirlwind first fortnight. Conscription was scrapped, remaining links to the Vietnam War ended, imperial honours went too. Soon came welfare payments for single mothers, the voting age dropped to 18, and he made good on a 20-year goal to recognise Communist China. Only 18 months into office, the Senate was frustrating him. Whitlam called a crash or crash through double dissolution election and won.
This is an historic, an unprecedented, a sobering occasion.
His government slid into disarray and scandal. The economy was deteriorating. Unemployment, inflation and debt were climbing. 2 ministers were lost over a shady Middle Eastern loan scheme. One was embroiled in a sex affair. The Prime Minister then met his match in a determined new opposition leader and was crunched between Crown and Constitution.
As curs.
But confidence was never a problem.
Some might have seen the actual words you chose as something of a cheap shot.
I think what I said for an impromptu speech was magnificent.
Rage was maintained, but a month later, Whitlam's prime ministership was over in a landslide defeat to Malcolm Fraser. The Whitlam era tested the nation's political institutions as never before. It changed the Labor Party forever. It changed the way the opposition handles budgets. And, remarkably, in the almost 40 years that followed, it changed the relationship between the two men who pushed each other to the brink.
No, I'm on the right of you, but that's incorrect.
Policy agreement on media ownership, a republic and Indigenous issues replaced enmities of old.
He had great ambitions for Australia, and many of his ideas were good. And if he had a fault, maybe he tried to do too much too quickly.
The respect of the 22nd Prime Minister is shared by the 23rd.
In my judgment, no star has shone brighter in the Australian political firmament over the years than the star of Gough Whitlam.
And by the 24th.
There's Australia pre-1972 and Australia post-1972. And that exclamation mark in our national history is his mark.
A sense of loss is felt by the many he led.
The great man of my life had gone. If I achieved anything, he made me.
And Gough Whitlam's advice to the next generation?
I urge my dear friends and supporters, maintain your enthusiasm.
He did for 98 years.
Gough Whitlam inspired almost every Labor politician that came after him. Among them is the party's deputy leader, Tanya Plibersek, who spoke to me from inside the old House of Representatives chamber this evening. Tanya Plibersek, what are your memories of Gough Whitlam?
Well, my earliest memory, in fact my earliest political memory, was sitting on my dad's lap. He'd come home from work in his overalls and I'd sit on his knee while he watched the news at night. And I remember Gough and Margaret coming down the stairs from a plane. Maybe they'd landed in China, I don't know. And I said to my dad, "That's Gough Whitlam, isn't it, Daddy? He's a good man, isn't he?"
And what did that good man mean for the nation?
Well, I think those 3 short years changed our nation permanently and for the better. Medicare, free university education, equality between men and women, Indigenous Australians given land rights for the first time. So many reforms in such a short time, so many reforms that have made us a better, fairer, stronger, more equal place.
It obviously means a lot to you. What does his passing do to you? Does it cause you to reflect on your own place in history and the importance of the decisions that you make?
Well, of course it does. I think part of our grieving today is that it is a call to all of us who are engaged in political life today to keep up the fight, to be brave, to be disciplined, to deliver for the people that we represent.
Tanya Plibersek, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
In the Northern Territory, Gough Whitlam's being remembered as the first Prime Minister for Indigenous Australians. His central role in securing land rights for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is a legacy keenly felt by today's Indigenous leaders. Anthony Stewart reports from Alice Springs.
After his election, Gough Whitlam set about reshaping the relationship between white and black Australia. He established the Land Rights Royal Commission. It led to the creation of the Land Rights Act, the first attempt by an Australian government to recognise Aboriginal people's traditional ownership of the land. But it was this image that was etched into the minds of many, marking the end of one of Australia's most significant Indigenous protests when Wave Hill Station was handed back to the local Gurindji people.
Solemnly hand to you these deeds as proof in Australian law that these lands belong to the Gurindji people.
His symbolic gesture with pioneering Indigenous activist Vincent Lingiari showed he was the first Australian Prime Minister to recognise Indigenous people's connection to country.
Today is for land rights. It's a bit of a sad because Gough Whitlam's the one who gave the right to be where they want to be and right with self-determination, rightful in their land.
I will go back to Wave Hill and pick up some soil from the same ground that he picked up and gave to my grandfather, and I will try and bring it down to Sydney. I will find my own way to Sydney. I know there's cremation, but I'd like to hand it to his family.
Mr Whitlam's death has been so keenly felt here in Central Australia that some Aboriginal communities have signalled they'll enter a period of traditional mourning.
Gough Whitlam is hailed as a champion of the young. In fact, his legacy was one of the subjects in today's final high school exams. Modern history students were asked whether or not the Fraser government completely overturned the changes of the Whitlam era. Rebecca Barrett caught some students after the exam.
A modern history exam over on the day a key chapter in Australian history closed, and Gough Whitlam's legacy looms large.
Gough Whitlam definitely means free university to me. Free tertiary education is of course something that we all wish we still had.
With many considering a university degree, it was a familiar theme.
By trying to privatise university fees, it's only pushing that gap further and further apart between the rich and the poor.
These girls say they spent a lot of time in Year 10 studying the Whitlam years.
Obviously everyone knows about the dismissal and that's what people remember him for, but I think when you really think about what he did for women, for Indigenous rights, he's such an amazing Prime Minister.
As a woman coming into my 18th year, the fact that women were able to get the vote during Gough Whitlam's reign.
Principal David Tomlin was doing his final exams during Whitlam's dismissal.
This is a person who had an impact upon me, changed my awareness of the world, political consciousness, social awareness, and I wanted the same thing for the girls.
Inspiring students and their teachers to be advocates for change. Rebecca Barrett, ABC News.
The ABC's Insiders presenter Barry Cassidy has been watching and reporting on Australian politics for more than 40 years. Barry, people are remembering Gough Whitlam as Prime Minister today, but it was as opposition leader that he began the process of reform.
I don't think you can overstate what Gough Whitlam did in opposition. There was that audacious trip to China, of course, went against public opinion. He went over without a real prospect of seeing Chow En Lai. He saw him for a couple of hours and really changed political history as a result of that. But at home, he reformed the Labor Party from opposition. He took on the so-called faithless men. He gave more power to the parliamentary party. And, you know, in the end, I think he took the Labor Party from what was essentially a party of protest through the 1960s to one that was essentially a government in waiting.
He is, of course, a national treasure, but to the Labor Party, he's an icon.
He'll always be revered by the Labor Party. Right across the political divide, there'll always be different views about Gough Whitlam, but I think Labor Party supporters would have a place in their hearts for Gough Whitlam in the same way that the Republicans do in the United States for Ronald Reagan and the Democrats for John Kennedy. I think that's his standing.
Barry Cassidy there. So a bittersweet wake continues here behind me in the Old King's Hall with the Labor caucus remembering an honoured son with a few drinks. But for now, from me, that's all from Old Parliament House.